After reading the statements, we realize that certain pairs, or rather a rudimentary sequence, comes into play. We'll get two pairs and two overall sets of statements. We begin the sequence with D, which says research has found that people usually focus on their weaknesses and think negatively. And then we find there is statement E and B, which form a pair. E says, instead, they react out of fear with their words, how, if only, and why. Now, they here is talking about people. There is a lot of mention of people. We see people in A, we see people in C again, and then again in D. So we don't know which people, which particular statement E is referencing. It relates to the entire context, of course, but we do find that there is a direct connection between E and B in the aspect of reaction. They react out of fear. And then B says, you must guard against these reactions. These reactions, it is talking about the reactions mentioned here. How, if only, and why. So first things first, let's clear all of this out and put what we know in sequence. We have D coming before because it introduces people focusing on their weaknesses and thinking negatively. Now, this also says research, so there's a high probability that D is the opening statement. Let's keep a bit of a gap in between, and then we have the pair EB, and we've just connected E and B on the aspect of reactions. After that is done, we find that statements C and A also form a pair in that sequence. C tells us, is it any wonder that there is a great deal of skepticism about companies and people who step away from the crowd and declare worthy goals? In the aspect of skepticism about companies and people, especially people who step away from the crowd and declare worthy goals, here, especially in the aspect of declaring goals, we see the connection with A. Because there is skepticism regarding this, regarding declaring goals, we see that A brings it back, brings the argument back to the negative aspect, the weaknesses and thinking negatively aspect. People reject goal lines because they have none. So the goals, the worthy goals from C, they connect with goal lines from A. Rather, the skepticism around declaring worthy goals connects with the rejection of goal lines because the reason is given. So we find that there's another pair in C and A. C introduces the aspect of worthy goals and skepticism, and A drives the point home, bringing the argument back to the aspect of thinking negatively, where people reject goal lines because they have none. Now that we've done this, we just have to see where C would fit, logically speaking, or rather where CA would fit. Logically speaking, this pair CA might fit at the beginning, in between D and EB, or at the end. Now, at the beginning, we cannot place this at all. There is no possibility to do that because D says research has found that people usually focus on their weaknesses and think negatively. This tells us research has found. So this is the introduction point. And then focus on their weaknesses and think negatively. Think negatively is an aspect that is exemplified in C and A. So skepticism, rejection of goal lines, all of these connect with the idea of thinking negatively. So we cannot place CA at the beginning. This choice is ruled out. So let's clear this out. We find that CA might, let's clear this out as well. We find that CA might fit very well between D and EB because D, as we have seen, introduces the premise, and then we see on their focusing on their weakness and thinking negatively, this connects with there is a great deal of skepticism about companies and people. Is it any wonder there is a great deal of skepticism? Because people usually tend to focus on their weaknesses and think negatively. Then we have the aspect of CA and then EB, where AE also have a very good connection. A says people reject goal lines because they have none. And then E says instead they react out of fear with their words. So they reject goal lines, they react out of fear with their words. And we see that these reactions, they are very well in line with the rejection of goal lines. So to declare worthy goals, that is, there is skepticism around that, but most people reject goal lines. They respond instead, they react instead out of fear with how, if only, and why. And these we can see: how to achieve goal lines, we don't know. If only we could do this or that to achieve goal lines. Why should we achieve goal lines? We find that C fits very well between the two not pairs, but then the sequence of D and then EB. CA fits perfectly in between D and EB. So this one choice can be qualified. This is a good idea. At the end, yet again, we cannot place C and A, because we have, as we have seen, a very strong connection between A and E, which would be broken. If we place BC, that seems out of place, because B sort of changes the idea. It sort of changes the premise. You must guard against these reactions. So we have EB. They react out of fear. You must guard against these reactions. And then C says, is it any wonder that there is a great deal of skepticism about companies and people? There's absolutely no connection between B and C. You must guard against these reactions. Then, as if in a conclusion, it says, is it any wonder? So because you must guard against these reactions, thus there is a great deal of skepticism about companies and people. Makes no sense. So we find that placing CA at the end also doesn't work out at all. So we can clear this out, eliminate all of these choices, and we finally get our sequence ready. So the opening statement is statement D. Then we have the pair CA. So C is the second statement in our sequence, and A is the third statement. And then we have the pair EB. So E comes into the sequence as the fourth statement, and finally B comes in as the fifth statement. And thus we get the answer sequence as DCAEB.